Think about the U.S. government, where 75% of its workforce disappears overnight. Sounds rather radical, doesn't it? Well, that's exactly the vision that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are spearheading under Donald Trump's bold plan to streamline Washington, D.C., or the deep state. But is this a recipe for efficiency or just plain chaos? These two billionaires plan to reshape America's federal workforce and the seismic shifts it could and may very well bring. Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. The goal of DOGE, D-O-G-E, the Department of Government Efficiency, is to target $500 billion in spending when Trump enters the presidency. Donald Trump has created a task force to dismantle the federal government. Call them the dynamic duo. Who is the dynamic duo? Well, first, we have the multi-billionaire Elon Musk, who spent approximately $119 million of his own money to help get Trump back into the White House, and also be part of the family portrait on election night when Trump won the 2024 presidential election. On the other side, we have Mr. MAGA, hype man, Vivek Ramaswamy. Billionaires Elon and Vivek are sharing details about how their newly created Department of Government Efficiency plans to take aim at whittling down the federal spending, with the two writing in a Wall Street Journal an opinion piece defining how they are aiming to cut $500 billion in annual spending. Now understand that DOGE isn't an official department, or even part of the government, as it would require approval from Congress. In short, Elon and Vivek will review the books, assess what needs to be cut, and make recommendations. Now, I'm not sure if not making DOGE an official department was planned, but they dodged a bullet in doing so. Now, why do I say that? Keeping it on the outside as an advisory role would protect it from getting sucked up into the bureaucratic quicksand and avoid the irony of creating another federal agency in the name of shrinking the size of the U.S. government. The announcement of DOGE has raised many questions, from whether Musk and Ramaswamy will have the authority to make changes in federal spending, typically controlled by Congress, as well as our group's powers and how it will operate. Musk and Ramaswamy answered some of these questions in their opinion piece, arguing that President-elect Donald Trump has the authority to cut spending authorized by Congress. Now, while Elon and Vivek said they expect to prevail in cutting costs, there have been plenty of examples throughout the decades of efforts to control federal spending, which have had only limited success. For instance, President Ronald Reagan in the 1980s tapped businessman J. Peter Grace to recommend reforms, resulting in about 2,500 recommendations for cutting spending, most of which were never implemented. Musk has suggested slicing $2 trillion in annual federal spending, which experts say is unrealistic, given that most of the nation's $6.7 trillion in yearly outlays is spent on Social Security, Medicare, and the military. You know, it's called simple math, and it just doesn't add up. Only about 4% of the budget goes to civilian employee compensation, and firing all those federal workers would only cripple the national defense, veterans care, homeland security, and other essential services. Now, to be transparent here, I'm all for trimming back some of the bloated departments we currently have. However, the mindset must be to use a scalpel instead of an axe. Additionally, making the process gradual rather than just pulling the cord out of the wall socket and see what happens. However, in a newspaper opinion piece, Elon and Vivek wrote that their initial aim will be to cut the $500 billion plus in annual federal expenditures that are unauthorized by Congress. Now, here's what to know. Where will DOGE aim to cut federal spending? 2/3 of federal spending is mandatory through programs such as Social Security and Medicare, while discretionary spending is primarily spent on defense. Musk and Vivek said they'll target $500 billion in spending unauthorized by Congress and programs they believe aren't in line with lawmakers' intentions. Now, the biggest source of expired authorizations sits with healthcare for veterans, which cost about $119 billion in fiscal 2024, according to the Congressional Budget Office. However, Musk and Vivek didn't single out veterans' healthcare as a place where they'll seek to cut. Instead, they listed the following areas. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which receives $535 million a year. Think about this one, if you will. International organizations that receive $1.5 billion in grants. And Planned Parenthood and what they describe as progressive groups that receive almost $300 million per year. Now, which federal programs don't have authorization? Programs mentioned by Elon and Vivek are relatively tiny compared with other unauthorized areas, such as veterans' healthcare. After veterans' healthcare, the next biggest sources of expired authorizations include programs that invest in the State Department and housing assistance. Some smaller programs which expired funding include Head Start, NASA, Musk would love this one, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. The latter provides weather forecasts, severe storm warnings, and climate monitoring, among other tasks. According to Project 2025, the conservative blueprint that was developed by the Heritage Foundation to guide the next conservative White House, that NOAA should be dismantled and many of its functions eliminated. Now, no need to worry if NOAA is eliminated, as we have Trump with his Sharpie to provide us the real-time weather report, just like he did when he was telling us about the direction of Hurricane Dorian. Dodge also wants to cut federal workers. Now, here's how they would approach it. Musk and Vivek also understand they'll have to push to cut the ranks of federal employees, saying their efforts could lead to mass headcount reductions across the federal bureaucracy. The pair didn't really enumerate the number of workers they'll seek to push out of the federal workforce. That number is yet to be determined. In 2023, there were more than 2 million federal workers, according to the Partisanship for Public Service, a nonpartisan group focused on the federal government. Most of those workers are within Veterans Affairs due to many health care providers for the VA, followed by people enlisted in the armed services, its data shows. Now, while civil service workers have job protections, Elon and Vivek argued that the president will be legally allowed to enact reductions in force that don't target specific workers, as well as to make decisions including large-scale firings to relocation of federal agencies out of the Washington area. Now, the Dodge program would help federal employees transition into the private sector. Now, the president can use existing laws to give them incentives for early retirement and to make voluntary severance payments to facilitate a graceful exit. Well, don't hold your breath on that one. The pair also said they want to require federal workers to be in the office 5 days a week, a policy change that they predict will result in a wave of voluntary terminations. Yes, these two have got everything figured out. In a post on X, the social media service owned by Elon Musk, he wrote, and I quote, "Federal government agencies are using, on average, just 12% of the space in their D.C. headquarters. The Department of Agriculture, with space for more than 7,400 people, average 450 workers each day, which is 6% occupancy." End quote. Musk added, "Why are American taxpayer dollars being spent to maintain empty buildings?" Okay, I'll give Elon a point for that one. Now, how much do federal workers earn? Okay, pay varies by department and seniority, with the federal government pushing a general schedule of basic pay grades for most federal employees. For 2024, the lowest pay grade was about $22,000 in annual earnings, while the highest was about $160,000 per year. Now, some agencies offer competitive salaries to compete with the private sector. Now, pay may also vary by location. Federal employees are located in every state, with about 80% located outside the Washington, D.C. area, according to the Partisanship for Public Service. Now, according to federal data, workers at the Administrative Conference of the United States an independent federal agency charged with identifying improvements for federal agencies to protect public interests, have the highest median salary at about $242,000 per year. The timeline for Elon and Vivek to complete their recommendations is July 4th, 2026, just in time for the United States' 250th year celebrating its democratic independence. Well, we'll see about that one. The Dodge report will likely end with a glorified recommendation report for Donald Trump, and we'll see how he takes that report and hopefully reads it to make his decisions. Now, we might want to be very mindful of the why Musk is so eagerly engaged in this endeavor. The world's richest man doesn't care about government efficiency. What Musk does care about is that Dodge will encourage Trump to weed out the regulators who oversee his SpaceX, Neuralink, and Tesla businesses. Conflicts of interest is there for both of these two charlatans. Both Musk, who owns X and is the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, and Ramaswamy, a biotech entrepreneur. They have reasons to want to slash regulations, which could interfere with their vast business portfolios. For instance, in a town hall, Musk repeatedly criticized government regulations, citing their interference with his companies. And I quote, "It's quite atrocious getting regulatory approval," Musk said while discussing his Neuralink startup that develops implantable brain-computer interfaces. "It does slow us down, and I think we should be able to go faster in the U.S. with advancing Neuralink technology and other technologies that are out there unrelated to my company." End quote. In other words, the government should be shrinked and made to work more for the president's men and less for the American people. Yeah, what could go wrong, right? What can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? If Trump can hold the band together, this could be the most nerve-wracking launch ever to slash the federal government. Maybe something good may come from this, but remember who was steering the wheel when deciding what direction to take. The bigger challenge will be keeping the team of egos in check. Now, at the moment, there's no one closer to Trump than Musk. He has been Trump's shadow, even popping up in family photos. Now, if politics hold true to form, there's only room for one giant ego in the Oval Office. And I'll leave it at that. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, for show notes and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. See you soon.